In this lesson, we'll get started by building the character's leg bones. So what we have here is a little character here that we can start to experiment with. We can start to use this to learn how the rigging tools work in 3ds Max so that by the end of this course we have a working rig that, yes, we can animate. Now keep in mind that as we start to progress through this quick start, we'll start to learn more and more about the really neat rigging tools in 3ds Max to eventually start getting more creative in building the systems that we would like to use for our characters and assets. So let's say we go ahead and get started by talking about how we're going to approach rigging this little character here. Now what we're going to do is create its skeleton first. It's a good idea to do that. That way we can make sure our bone placement is just right before we add any extra controls or anything that's complex that would cause us to redo a lot of work if our bone placement is not accurate. Alright, so to get started, what we'll do is go ahead and move over to our side view so we can go ahead and start to create our leg bones. It'd be a good idea to create them from a side view because of their natural bend. This is known as the preferred angle. And in order for us to make sure that when we start to work with inverse kinematics, that's used to simulate realistic limb animations like legs or arms. So just to make sure that we get some very natural looking results, we'll go ahead and follow this preferred angle. So let's say we go ahead and move over to our side view. I'll press Alt-W so we can go into our forward panel view. Then we'll go to our left view. Alright, beautiful. Now from here, you can see that the wireframe of our character is gray. This is the initial color of our bone object. So if you want, you could always go ahead and recolor this. So with the character selected, you can go to, let's say, the color palette. And under here, we can go ahead and work with, let's say, a darker color, maybe a blue. Beautiful. So now, as we start to create our bone objects, we can see clearly where they will end up. I'd also like to point out that if you are wanting to, let's say, kind of lock your mesh down so you could just start to focus on your bone objects without accidentally selecting your mesh, well, we can do that in 3ds Max. A fast way to do that is to simply go in and create a layer. So let's say we do that. What we'll do first is go ahead and just grab all pieces of this mesh, including the eyes and teeth. Let's make sure that they get recolored as well to that dark blue. Much better. And now, with the entire character selected, we'll head over to Tools, Manage Layers. Alright, let's go ahead and create a new layer from Selection. We'll make sure the default layer is active. Very important, because as we start to change the state of this layer, if this is the active layer, then any object that we add in 3ds Max will be automatically added to this layer. So we just want to make sure they all get added back to our default layer. Let's go ahead and now rename this new layer to Model. Alright, beautiful. So we'll hit Enter to set the name. Now, what we can do here is go ahead and choose Freeze, and now we cannot select this model, but you can see how it is grayed out. So if you wanted to, you could always right-click on your layer and choose Object Properties, and you can turn off Frozen in Gray. So now that's going to disable that gray effect, and we're left with our object color. Alright, so let's say we go back and start to build our leg bones. What we'll do is go ahead and grab our bone tools. Underneath Create, we can now choose Systems, Bones. Another way to do this is under the Animation menu, and here they are. So now once we click Create Bones, take a look. Now we have some properties that we can start to work with over to our right. Let's go ahead and start to work with these initial settings. So we'll start by creating our thigh bone's pivot point, and then we'll click at the knee, and we'll click at the ankle, And now let's go ahead and drag this last bone out and then right click. That's known as the nub. It's the end of our chain. Let's right click again to exit create bones mode just to take a look at our placement. Alright, so this looks pretty good. If you ever wanted to tweak your bone objects, it's a good idea to do so in bone edit mode. So as we start to do that, when we grab a bone object and start to move it around, take a look, we can move the pivot of this bone independently from the rest of its hierarchy. Now, if we were to turn that off and try to move this bone object, you could see how it's kind of locked. It's really fascinating stuff, but chances are if we want to adjust the position of a bone object, again, we don't want this type of behavior. Instead, we want something we'd get from bone edit mode. Now, once this is active, let me go ahead and show you something. Yes, when we start to move our bone object, only that gets influenced. However, if we were to double click, that'll grab its entire chain. So from that bone to its child object, and then we can use that to shift that back a bit more. So you do have those helpful tools if you need them. So taking a look at the knee, I think it's actually in a good spot. No need for bone edit mode. Okay, so from here, before we go ahead and start building out our foot chain, let's say we go ahead and move over back to our perspective view. So press Alt W, go ahead and right click inside of this panel. Again, we'll press Alt W. From here, we can press F3 to go to wireframe mode, and we can start to reposition this bone object. So let's go ahead and start to just translate this over, and we'll also go ahead and start rotating it over until we've managed to place it just right to fit inside the character's leg. The reason why we did not build the foot bone just yet is because it's going to be better for us to keep it separate just so that we can get some ideal orientation. So you can see how we're slanting this chain. Well, when we start to work with our foot bone, we'll make sure that it's not slanted this way. We'll make sure that it still connects back to this chain, but we'll have some much better control over that separate chain. Alright, so this looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and start renaming these objects. So for any object that we will eventually envelope, meaning that this object will influence our mesh in a way where we'll get some deformations. So for any of those types of objects, we can go ahead and use a prefix of BN for bone. Something like our nub can be renamed to BE because we wouldn't want to skin to that. That would be a waste of time since it really doesn't do anything for us except act as, let's say, a connector for something like our foot chain. So that's going to be BN underscore L since we've moved this to the left side of our character. And then that's going to be underscore thigh 01. The 01 is helpful because if we were to ever duplicate this object, if I were to press Ctrl V, you can see how it changes to a 02, letting us know that this object has been cloned. And at this point, it's either a matter of renaming the object if we need it, or removing it if it is a duplicate that is not needed. Alright, so I'll go ahead and cancel this out. Let's go ahead and copy this name. We'll go to our shin, paste, and let's go ahead and rename this to BNL shin. Alright, great. So now when we get to our nub, for the ankle, we'll go ahead and paste in our name. We'll change the BN to a BE. And that's going to be L ankle 01. Alright, great. Now it's a good idea to freeze transforms on these bone objects once we find a good spot for them. Something that we can do throughout our rigging process until we start to add complex systems to these bones like constraints. But watch this. If we were to go ahead and start moving this leg around, and if we were to go ahead and alt right click and choose transform to 0, take a look. We cannot set this back to where it was originally because its transforms were not frozen. So I'll go ahead and undo back. And with our thigh bone selected, we'll double click to grab its entire hierarchy. And now we'll go ahead and alt right click and choose freeze transform. And we'll go ahead and choose yes to make sure it updates the transform information on all objects. So what we have now, if we were to go to our motion panel, is a new controller here that has been zeroed out. The beautiful thing about this is, if we were to go ahead and start moving this, we can now alt-right click and choose Transform to 0 to bring this back. If you'd like to learn more information, by the way, once you have finished this quick start about rigging, feel free to take a look at Introduction to Character Rigging as well as Character Rigging for Production. And then once you have a good grasp of the rigging tools, you might go ahead and take a look at our advanced character rigging tutorial. Again, one step at a time. Alright, great. So now that we have all of these frozen down, let's say we go ahead and work on creating our foot bone, and then I'll go ahead and show you how to mirror this across. So the foot bone should not take much time because we've already grasped the process of creating bone objects in 3ds Max. So let's say we go ahead and choose Create Bones, and instead of clicking right on top of our nub, which is going to continue its chain, we'll go ahead and click close to it. So we'll go ahead and click near our nub object for the ankle, and we'll create the ankle bone, then our foot bone, and then we'll create our nub. Alright, so we'll go ahead and drag this out, right click, and then we'll right click again to exit Create Bones mode. Let's say we go ahead and take a look at things from our perspective view. To snap this root bone over to the nub, what we can do is work with Quick Align. The hotkey for that is Shift A. So take a look, we're now in Quick Align mode. If we were to go ahead and click on our nub object, now you can see it has been snapped, the position of that object. Alright, beautiful stuff. So this looks really nice. From here we can go to our Rotate tool, and we can make sure we're under our view or let's say world coordinate system, just so we can kind of slant this bone over in world mode to get it reoriented properly. Once we've managed to do that, we then want to link it back to this chain. So we can do so by simply working with our link tool. We'll go ahead and grab our ankle bone here that would be skin to, and we'll go ahead and link it to our nub bone. And here's what we end up with. When we go ahead and grab our shin, watch this, when we start to rotate, now the entire chain follows. Very nice. Now when you're ready to rotate and you want the rotate manipulator to match the orientation of your object, you could always go ahead and switch this to gimbal mode. This is very important for animation because this shows you the axis you're truly animating in. So you can see how we gracefully follow the orientation of the shin. Alright, let's say we go ahead and rename these objects. So that's going to be BN L ankle 01. Go ahead and copy this name. We'll go to the next, and that's going to be BNL foot 01. And then we get to the toes nub. So we'll go ahead and paste, and that's going to be BE, since it's at the end, L toe 01. Alright, fantastic. So we have our bone objects in place. Let's go ahead and grab our thigh. We'll double click. We'll now right click and choose Freeze Transform, and then choose Yes to go ahead and update the frozen transforms on all objects in this hierarchy. Alright, beautiful. So now we can go ahead and work on mirroring this across. Now in order to do that, what I'd recommend doing first is going in and creating a helper, just so we can go ahead and find the other end of this character, or the other side, the opposite side here. So it's a fast way of doing that. It's a trick I like to use. So underneath Create, we'll go ahead and head over to Helpers, and we'll go ahead and find a point helper. Let's go ahead and just click in our scene to add it. Let's right click to exit our helper tool. And now let's go ahead and press Shift A to quick align this object over to our thigh. Now what we can do is make sure to mirror this across by looking at our x-axis and using the reciprocal. So I'll just go ahead and head over to the x-axis under our coordinate system. Again, we can make sure we're under view mode, or let's say world mode. And then we can simply put in the negative operation before that value. And when we hit enter, it has now been mirrored across. Beautiful. So here's what we can do now. We can go ahead and grab our thigh bone, double click to grab its entire chain, and now we can use mirror from our bone tools. We can go ahead and start to use offset to kind of slide this over, and then choose OK. And now to make sure it has been mirrored perfectly, we can grab our thigh, press Shift A, and then we can go ahead and select our helper. Beautiful. We no longer need the helper now. It's done its job. Goodbye, helper. All right, so now it's time to just go through and rename these bone objects because they have the suffix mirrored and they still have the name L. But in this case, we'd want to work with R since it's on the right side, and then we'd want to get rid of the mirrored suffix. So let's do that for the other bone objects, and that's going to complete this lesson. In the next lesson, we'll just continue our setup process for the character's legs. We have just a few things to do before we're ready to start moving up the body.